And you're listening to The Brown Perspective. This is Eduardo, and I'm here with my fellow co-host, R.O.
Hey, what is happening?
What's going on, man? How are you? How are you celebrating Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day this week?
Oh, yeah. I celebrate Columbus Day, not Indigenous Peoples Day.
538, 530 years of
Yeah.
the traumatic encounter between our cultures. And it just so happened that this week, everything that went down in the city of LA with the city council, with the three city council members, and then the president of the LA County Labor Federal Federation, I think just points out to a lot of the anti-racism,
Mm.
anti-blackness, anti-indigenous sentiment that we still got to work through in our community.
Yeah, the Eurocentric perspective. Everyone seems to adopt that. And I just want to clarify, just want to make it clear because people these days, it's so easy to take you out of context. Of course, I don't celebrate Columbus Day. Again, going back to the Eurocentrism, the fact that you still think it's appropriate to celebrate not even a discovery. Right, he didn't discover anything. He just stumbled
Mm-hmm.
upon a continent with different people, and it brought so much misery to the inhabitants. But if it's because it's a Eurocentric point of view, they like to focus on it's a discovery because it meant so much for Europe. But again, it downplays what it meant for the Native Americans, and that's exactly what it means to have um, a perspective that favors your people. And so, yeah, I mean, I appreciate other people that push back on that and say, let's think about the other side. Let's think about all the people that were already living here and how they were affected by this. So definitely more for Indigenous Peoples Day. But I digress.
Well, yeah, I mean, in some ways, the topic is related because it is about colonization. And I think the act of colonization itself, how, to your point, it does lend itself to be a more Eurocentric perspective. It doesn't value the contributions or the beauty within indigenous culture and and everything that was already happening, the
Mm-hmm.
complex societies that were already here throughout the Americas. And then you add the anti-blackness element. And in some ways, our minds were colonized and we were pinned against each other. I mean, so one of the ways that colonialism worked is this caste system of, you know, blacks in the bottom, indigenous as well. And then the closer you were, the lighter you were, the closer you were to Spain, the better off you were in terms of economic opportunities
Mm-hmm.
and all these other things. So I think, unfortunately, a lot of those, what does he call it, the vestiges of that colonial past came
Yeah.
to a head during the
Yeah.
conversation that we're having about a real important topic, which is the redistricting and the allocation of political power within a city that is majority Latino here in the city of LA.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and play the video of Nury Martinez's comments.
Mike Bonin is an LA City Council member and father to a young black son. Last year, they went to an MLK Day parade. City Council President Nury Martinez had some issues.
It's like black and brown on this float. And then there's this white guy with this little black kid who's misbehaved. The kid is bouncing off the effing walls on the float, practically tipping it over. There's nothing you can do to control him. Parece changuito.
Translation, little monkey.
You know what I was thinking when I heard this? If this is what she says in a professional setting, mind you, closed door, but still with her professional colleagues, imagine what she says at home when she's with her partner. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's the sad reality. I think in a lot of our families, we probably have that individual, that tia tío, who unfortunately, despite of how they may look, they talk crap about either indigenous or of black individuals.
Even though they themselves are indigenous and have indigenous features. And I've always always thought that that's a form of self hate in a way,
Yes, yes,
because they must at some point at some level, either consciously or subconsciously, there must be something going on in there regarding their identity and their association with uh, indigenous culture, and potentially feeling this inferiority complex. But yeah, so the first thing regard, not even the, we'll get to the comments on what she said regarding the son, and saying that he looks like a changuito. But even before that, when, okay, so she's talking about a parade float where there's Latinos, a mix. It sounded like a mix of Latinos and blacks, and then she says, "and this white guy," right? And even that type of language to talk about white people in that sense, and it's not even just any random white person. Like, it's Mike Bonin. She knows who this person is, right? She could have easily said Mike's son, but she says this white person. So I thought that was interesting, because it throws a lot of red flags for me. Obviously, I'm doing like this, what is it called, armchair diagnosis, where just based on what I'm hearing her say, I'm trying to draw up these things. But those to me are like little flags that say, oh man, well, what's going on here? This, like, first self-hatred, the other one is racist against black people, and then this it seems like animosity, or some, like, a bit of it, even hostility towards white people, to refer to Mike Bonin as this white guy. Like, very impersonal, especially if she knows who he is.
Well, they should. I mean, they work together. They've been in the council for a long time. But I think it also gets at the fact that Mike Bonin is not only white, he's also gay, and he adopted his black son. So in some ways, it's also, from her perspective, I think she thinks is a political calculation as well on his part, to be appealing to an important segment of the LA power base, right? But so I think that's a little bit of behind it, right? Like,
right, but
in some ways, like, he just adapted him to be, to be seen as a likable guy, or woke, or even, I guess in this case, the white savior.
Right. But there's also a way to criticize that in a way that you don't come across as this unhinged racist, because calling someone's kid a changuito, and that's, even in Mexican culture, that's like the worst insult that you can throw on someone's kid, because Mexicans do this all the time. Not only do they call black kids changuitos, they also call either their Mexican kids, depending on how dark skinned they are, or their physical appearance. So they do that a lot. So it is very offensive. So so there's a way to be more tactful when you are discussing, say, so the typical, when we talk about being a politician, so you would say something like, Mike Bonin's a great guy, but I question some of his recent decisions if they're not more politically motivated. Something like that, something vague, so that it doesn't really come back to you. Of course, she didn't think that she was being recorded, but still.
Well, this was locker room talk.
Yeah,
it was just political locker room.
But see, but the fact that she was so comfortable saying that, it's also a statement to Kevin De Leon and Jill Cedillo, because she's way too comfortable talking like that amongst them. Like, let's say, for example, just like hypothetically, if I'm hanging around with the colleagues, you first have to get to know them a little bit before you know what's appropriate or what's not, what you can joke about, and what you can. So this must be like the 100th or 1,000th time that this happens, and so I'm pretty sure they all participate in this type of like racist, insensitive behavior. And the other thing that I wanted to say is, in one way, it's disappointing to hear this, because it's like, oh, like, here we go again, right? Like, Latinos were making strides. We take a step forward. She was the first Latina president of the city council, and now we see this, and it's like such a huge setback, and it's disappointing. But on the human level and knowing the Mexican culture, I'm also not very surprised because what's her age? Like maybe like mid 40s, late 40s. The generation where she grew up, a lot of these things were still talked about in the open. And so she must have been raised in a pretty, or like in a somewhat racist culture, racist upbringing, no different than me. But obviously, I choose to not perpetuate those type of things that I learned as a kid. Whereas her, it seems like she's pretty comfortable just like falling back to that mode of how she may have been raised. I don't think these are things that she picked that she picked up on her own. These things come from the culture. They don't come from her. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately within Mexican culture, there's a lot of invisibility of the Black Mexicans, right? And I think, but even then, she grew up in LA, but I know she grew up in the part of LA where perhaps there's not as many African Americans. So she grew up in the San Fernando Valley.
Yeah.
In the valley.
Right. Yeah, it's not as many, not as like South LA or Compton or Watts, those areas, Inglewood.
And yet, I think her mentor was the former president of the LA City Council, who was African American.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, a lot of the other elected officials that she got along with on the council were African American,
right,
too.
But
so I think that's why.
But we need to understand that what it means to compartmentalize, because that's how we can really understand how someone can harbor racist thoughts, at the same time have mentors that are Black or really close friends that are Black. Because when you compartmentalize, all that you're doing is you're saying, this group of people that I know on a personal level, they're not like that. They're the exception. But all the other ones, they fit into my stereotypes. And so compartmentalizing is something that a lot of people do. And if you're not aware of it, then obviously you don't even know what's going on. It's just natural to you. You just think, oh, well, I'm not a racist person because I have Black friends, right? That's the first sign usually that you are racist, because you've admitted that you've compartmentalized, that your friends, you think that because you have friends and that makes you not racist, and that shields you from like it means that you don't harbor these other thoughts, and you think that's your way of like proving that you don't. But it's not. It's a tell. As soon as you say that, I just think, oh yeah, this person is just good at compartmentalizing.
And the unfortunate reality is that as president of the LA City Council, she has a lot of symbolic and actual power on a lot of the decisions and policies that the council decides.
And another thing is she's taking a beating on Twitter. I don't know if you followed that, but because she resigned, right? So she resigned as the president, and then she was forced to resign from the council as well. And she finally gave in and gave this resignation letter. And in it, I read it some time ago, so I'll just paraphrase what I read, that she is an example of how far Latina girls can go, the things that they can achieve. And so she's like flipping it, right? She's just trying to focus on the positive aspects of her career up until this point. But people are not having any of that. They're just giving it to her on Twitter. And I'll look for some tweets right now.
Yeah, I think the comment that she made was, I hope that I've inspired you to dream beyond that which you can see. And of course, the internet is always going to win.
I think whenever I hear about these things like corruption with Latino politicians, or Latino politicians showing their true face, like not being more clever about what it means to be a politician, because being a politician is a skill. Like, look, I can't put a percentage on it, but a lot of politicians say things that they shouldn't say in private. They do inappropriate things, but they understand the art of being a politician. And that means being sharp and being on guard, even if you don't think that there's anyone listening. you maintain this facade of professionalism because that's what the job entails. And whenever I hear Latinos dropping the ball on this, in this aspect, or being corrupt, I can't help but think, and again, this is based on my upbringing. This is based on me growing up in Mexico. This is just me getting even more upset that it's like a collective failure, because we come to this country to better ourselves, and we have this constant chip on our shoulders. We have this constant stereotype that the dropout rate in high school, like the problems with like dropout rates in college, that Latinos not majoring in like specific sciences, et cetera, et cetera. Like we always seem to be trying to catch up. Mm-hmm. And at least we have like all these other, now we have good representation, especially in LA with Latino politicians. But whenever they drop the ball in this regard, I always think like, oh fuck, well, here we go again. Like them showing that Latinos can't quite, not like that I believe it, but them reinforcing that stereotype that on a professional level we're still like lacking, that we can't even get being politicians correctly. That mm-hmm. that it's okay to think, well, I'm not saying it's okay, but like you just have to be realistic that everyone has these like things that they say in private. You don't say them in public. And also even being corrupt, right? There's an art to being corrupt. You don't just like do corruption in such a way that you're just going to get caught. And so when I think about like cities like Huntington Park, like Bell Gardens, like Maywood, like if you just like read a little bit about the type of corruption that goes on in those city councils, I just think to myself like, oh, come on, you fucking Latinos, like at least at least do the corruption in a more sophisticated way, right? Like represent us in a way that you were running the city council in a way that you were enriching yourself, but man, were you creating these like amazing like public works or raising these buildings or bringing jobs to the city, and you were doing corruption at the same time and enriching yourself. But just do corruption like other Americans do it. Don't do like this like low level type of corruption that is so obvious, and once you get exposed, it's like, oh my god, like what did they thought they could get away with this shit? Mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think it's just
it does.
Yeah,
it does. I think that you have a point. I think that there's those individuals who are able to do it and get away with it, or do it more masterfully.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think it's also important to highlight that the response, and I think that has been the silver lining here, that you have a number of other Latino leaders who have stepped up to condemn the comments, who have stepped up as leaders, who hopefully gives me hope that the city as a whole will be able to move forward from this episode.
Yeah, I think so. I think hard to say if her political career is over. She may try to rebrand, take some time off, hire a PR agency or some. I'm sure there's companies out there, right, to help you rebuild your image. So she'll try to come back at some point, 6 months, a year, 2 years. It doesn't matter. But yeah, I think the city will be okay. But I do think that the level of corruption in some of these city councils is pretty alarming. Like especially again, like Huntington Park and like cities like Maywood. And though I mentioned those because I lived close to those, and I know people that work, say, for like the police department, for like the Huntington Park Police Department. And just the stories that they would tell me about the type of corruption in the council, as well as the with like the politics and the nepotism within the police department itself, it's just pretty alarming. So I do hope we have better days ahead of us. And the other thing, so I have this tweet here highlighted, and it shows she didn't even apologize to the people. And that's just, I suppose when your ego gets to a point where it just takes over your entire personality, maybe that's how you can explain behavior like this. But I'm surprised that she wouldn't even have the awareness to apologize to the people that she offended.
And I think to your earlier comment, I think to be in politics and to be a politician oftentimes takes an ego, right? And I think that's unfortunately the reality that's difficult because you have to have the ego, you have to have a level of self-confidence, you have to be able to fundraise money, and there's all, like you mentioned earlier, there's a whole skill set of that makes a politician a good politician. Unfortunately, in the way that the system is currently built.
Exactly. And this other comment here from Tony.
Toño.
I keep seeing Latinos saying Nury Martinez's comments don't represent our community, when in reality they do. Right on. That's exactly what I'm saying, what we're saying here. There's so much anti-indigenous and anti-blackness that Latinos excuse on a daily basis in order to challenge generational views or upset their families. So that's spot on. And I mean, these incidents serve as reminders that we still have a long way to go, and I hope people don't drop the ball, because on the one hand, how can we claim as a people that we're fighting against the racism that we perceive from mainstream white America collectively against us and blacks, and then at the same time do it to each other? Because not only did she have the racist comments about the black kid, but she also said disparaging comments about the woman from Oaxaca, didn't she? And we didn't play those, and I don't have them in front of me, but talking shit about people from Oaxaca and Puebla is very common. I mean, there's even a word for them. They're called Oaxaquitas, and I didn't even know, right? So I just found out in the last few years that they don't like being called Oaxaquitas. So, I mean, I don't mean to laugh, but it's just, I'm laughing that I didn't know for the longest, because it was so normalized in my family that all my uncles called them Oaxaquitas. So I just thought, oh, that's, how like people from, I think from Guatemala, you call them Chapin, Chapines, and then from
Catrachos, Chapines.
Yeah, all of that. So I just thought it was something like that, but no. Apparently, it's an offensive word. Obviously, I wouldn't have to. I need to ask one of my friends from Oaxaca if that's true, but that's what I heard, and it makes sense because the way that it's used, it's used disparagingly by Mexicans, and for people that are listening to this that are not as familiar with the geography of Mexico. There's a huge difference between like central Mexico, northern Mexico, and southern Mexico. Whereas northern Mexico, states like Chihuahua, Durango, Sinaloa, Jalisco, there's like a good mix of the mestizo. So if you do a DNA test, you probably find like, I don't know if it's 50-50, maybe 60-40 European, indigenous. So you have a spectrum of people, but for the most part, you get a good mix. But when you go to the South, it's predominantly indigenous, especially in some of those states like Oaxaca. And so indigenous features, and in that region of Mexico, it's not like the Native Americans from North America that they were tall and lean. Natives from Oaxaca, from Puebla, they're very short. So short, dark skin, indigenous features. And to Mexicans, that's really when they say disparaging comments about indigenous people, those are the characteristics that they're disparaging, that they think are negative. Being short, being dark skinned, having indigenous features, looking indigenous. And so you bundle all of those together into a term like Oaxaquita, and that's really what you're saying. And so, right, so I'm not surprised that it is, if they would consider it an offensive term. It took me a really long time to realize that, because it had been so normalized for me growing up. And obviously, like, I never referred to them like that. I don't really have a lot of friends from Oaxaca. But again, when I would hear it, now I push back on it if I hear somebody say it. But before, I just thought it was like, oh, that's just how you refer to them.
Yeah, it's interesting because in Colombia for us is Los Pastusos. And again, similar to the Mexico, it's like in the southern part of the country, closer to where traditional home of a lot of indigenous tribes. So that's a lot of the negative stereotypes are related to people from Pasto, which is an actual, kind of like Oaxaca is also a departamento in Colombia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm glad you're learning to decolonize your mind, RO.
Yeah, every single day, man. You gotta wake up, fight your demons. There's no such thing as defeating your demons. There's just you wake up and you have to face them every single day. Sometimes you hope that for the most part you get to a place where you get the best of them every single day, but every now and then, they encuentran a little vulnerable and they get the best of you.
New demons come out too.
Yeah. All right, so, well, I think we can wrap it up there. So thank you, Nury Martinez, for making us look bad.
Well, making us look bad and hopefully encouraging us to do better next
We'll
time.
we'll make the best of your blunder. How about that? We'll try to make the best of it.
Let's do it.
All right. If you all out there enjoy our content, make sure to check us out. We are Brown Perspective. Nos vemos.
Ciao.